With the December holidays coming up, some domestic workers will not be receiving leave or pay, while others remain unaware of the labor law protection that is available to them. At the same time, domestic worker unions are urging some employers to register their employees with the Unemployment Insurance Fund. I'm joined now by Pinky Mashiane, who's the founder of the United Domestic Workers of South Africa, and hoping that Viwe Mlenzana, who has agreed to the interview, just running out of a little bit of time now, who's the Director General of the Department of Employment and Labour, will hopefully be joining us a little bit later in this conversation. I'd like to start with you, Pinky. Thank you so much for joining us in studio for this very important conversation. We do know that the plight of domestic workers has been an issue for a very long time. But I want us to talk about the challenges that domestic workers face at this time of the year when it's holiday season, the festive period.
Good evening, and thank you for having me once more. The challenges that domestic workers are facing during this time of the year, there are those domestic workers who are not aware if next day they are coming back to work. I have one domestic worker who said they are packing and they are not saying anything to me. And we know that every year there will be a domestic worker who will be left destitute by employers with nothing. And there are also those domestic workers that don't get anything as a sign of appreciation from the employers. They will bring up children and do everything for employers, but at the end of the year, there's nothing that will make them smile when they go home. They go with those underpayment and those low salaries. Other challenges faced by domestic workers during this time of the year is annual leave. There are employers who tell domestic workers that you are going on leave on the 24th, on the 3rd of January, you're coming back to work. And those are domestic workers who are employed full-time, who are supposed to have 21 days annual leave, but they don't get them.
And also at this time of the year as well, I'm assuming another challenge that domestic workers face is the problem of unpaid leave. So you know that you are going away to see your family for the Christmas period, and then your employer then says, well, you didn't work those days, so you're not going to get paid. Is that also one of the problems?
That's one of the problems. And according to the law, a domestic worker will go home for 3 weeks, 21 days. You pay the domestic worker the full salary. You don't pay the domestic worker for 1 week and say the other 3 weeks you're on leave, you don't get anything. That's what the law says. But unfortunately, there are other domestic workers who don't know about this and who accept everything that they are told by employers.
And, you know, the power dynamic as well between domestic workers and the employers is so unbalanced as well. So those must be very difficult conversations for a domestic worker to bring up with their employer to say, look, I know that these are my rights. I know you're actually supposed to register me with UIF. You're actually supposed to allow me to take my 21 days to go be with my family and rest, and while at the same time pay me as well. Do you find that as the years are going by that we are getting a little bit more of a balance in terms of that power dynamic where domestic workers are able to voice their concerns to their employers?
There are domestic workers in the union who are able to do that, and we also tell them when to approach the employer and how to approach the employer, because a relationship between a domestic worker and an employer is an intimate one. This person is staying in your house, looking after your children, so you have to sit down with her and speak with her. So that's what we are teaching them to do, so that they have to find a way how to approach their employers and know when their employers are angry. You cannot ask for an increase while the employer is angry. Wait for the day when she's very happy and excited, then approach her and tell her what you need. So there are those who are in the union and are also scared to speak to their employers. One example, one domestic worker, I went to her employers last week, and she's got many challenges, but when I got there, she said, no, don't tell them who you are.
Oh.
I ended up being a guest there and in the employer's house.
And what did you see, I mean, while you were there?
What I saw, they were acting, they were pretending as if they are very nice, but from what we are hearing from her, they even refused to give her food. Sometimes they give her leftovers, the chips and pap that they were eating. Slap her. Yeah, she's really suffering there. And I wanted to approach the employers politely and speak with them, but she got scared. Maybe she thought that maybe the employers will fight with her. And in my history, I haven't approached employers, and after that, the domestic worker was dismissed as a result of me speaking to the employers. But I respect their right. If they don't want me to speak with their employers, then I take that mandate from them.
Sure, it's a very scary picture that you're painting as well. You know, it's one of fear, one where one works in an environment that is fearful as well. If you can't be honest with the people that you work for this time of year as well, you mentioned that another challenge is that come January, many domestic workers come back and they're destitute because then they don't have jobs. What happens in that case? Is it a case where employers come January, they don't have money, so they decide we don't need the service anymore without communicating? Or is it that they have found somebody else by then?
There are few employers who are cruel. They will let Pinky go and hire somebody else in January. Let Pinky go in December, and in January they've got somebody new. I do have cases like that, where a domestic worker, as I'm speaking now, there's a domestic worker who's told to go home, and there's another one that is working, but she's told that they don't have money here in Everton. So there's a lot of things that employers are doing at the end of the year. That's why I always say to domestic workers, it's very important to be in a union, because employers are meeting somewhere and are discussing domestic workers. And they even say, this is how I treat my domestic worker. I was in a group on Facebook where there were employers in that group and they were not aware who I was. I could see how they influence each other, how they speak about domestic workers when they are on those groups. And domestic workers also need to do the same, not to speak bad of employers, but to unite so that they can exercise their rights in the right way. Being a union doesn't mean that you have to abuse the employer's rights. You know where to draw the line, and you know your position at your work, that this is where I end or this is where I start.
Yeah, and I'm assuming you obviously started this foundation because obviously there was a need as well in the sector. I believe, Pinky, that you were also a domestic worker for about 20 years?
Yes, more than 20 years.
More than 20 years even.
Yes.
So if you had to compare from when you used to be a domestic worker to where we are now, would you say we're making some improvements?
Yes, definitely. Slowly we are making some improvements, because during the time when I was starting to be a domestic worker, employers will pay you with anything that they want to pay you. Sometimes you'll just be given old clothes or some furnitures, and that will be a salary. You'll say, thank you, Baya Tanki. You say, yeah, domestic workers had no voice during that time. But today we are seeing we've got laws, we have UIF, even though there's still some challenges when coming to some employers who don't want to register their domestic workers with the UIF. But what I'm happy about that, as UDOSA, we make sure that a domestic worker, even if she was not registered with the UIF, the employer will pay that UIF when she's dismissed. If they're afraid to tell their employers to register them, they will register them when they are dismissed, and it's happening.
And from the Department of Labor as well, are you seeing the efforts being made from their side?
Yes, the Department of Labor is also making efforts, to be honest. Past weekend, we were in Wheatbank. There was a labor official from Wheatbank, Mr. Shavangano, who came and was happy to see that there are domestic workers who can be addressed by Department of Labor, because it's very difficult for them to get domestic workers. So he was happy and said to me, please give us that attendance register. Even today, he was telling me about the attendance register and those ID numbers so that they can check their UIF status. So it shows that definitely there are officials who want to make difference in domestic workers' lives.
We really appreciate you coming in and having this very important discussion with us. That's Pinky Mashiane, who is the founder of the United Domestic Workers of South Africa, just talking to us about the plight of domestic workers, particularly at this time of the year. We also had arranged to speak to the Department of Labor. Unfortunately, they weren't able to join us for this conversation.